yes, real estate can be a phenomenal way to grow wealth, not only for your company, but for you personally, if you're an owner. But I also want you to think about, okay, how hard will it take to sell that asset down the road when you're ready to sell it? Because at some point you're going to sell it, whether it mean you pass it on to your heirs or you sell it outright, maybe to the incoming ownership or a new partnership or something. At some point, you're going to dispose of that asset. And I want to make it as seamless and easy for you as possible to generate the most amount of proceeds you can at the end.
Hey, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited. I'm going to have a conversation with a very special guest named Kirsten Flory. I was actually a guest on her podcast very recently, The Small Business Mindset. We had a great conversation about tax strategy. For you guys that are wanting to know about tax strategy, Profit First a little bit more, definitely check out the Small Business Mindset podcast with Kirsten Flory. But today I'm excited because we're bringing her as a guest on our podcast. Yes. A little bit about Kirsten. She's a CEO. She's an author, a podcaster, 25 plus years in real estate. Okay. 25 plus years in real estate, business development and marketing. And today we're going to talk everything about commercial real estate. You know, one of the things that I see with my clients, with business owners that are talking to me is, it's end of year, they're looking for tax deductions. They're like, how do I get more tax deductions and how do I get it significant? Because suddenly now that I've implemented Profit First, I've got a 7, 8, 9 figure business, you know, it's easy to get in that 37% tax bracket, right? Especially if you're doing Profit First, right? It's very easy to get in that 37% tax bracket. And real estate is a great way to get some deductions while building your net worth, while not necessarily reducing your net worth, right? A lot of times you go to your accountant, they tell you buy a truck and you're like, I don't need a truck. Well, real estate is one of those things that hopefully will keep its value, right? And even though you're able to take some depreciation and take some aggressive write-offs, that real estate at the end of the day still holds its value. So I'm excited about this conversation and bringing Kirsten into our platform to talk everything commercial real estate. So welcome, Kirsten, to our platform.
Susanne, I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is a very, very exciting topic. And first of all, one of the things I love to just ask our guests is how did you even get into this topic, right? Commercial real estate.
Right. Yeah.
Why not homes?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So before I've been in commercial real estate about 12 years. And previously to coming into this industry, I was in banking. So I did business development for a large credit union system, had a lot of corporate clients, helped launch their commercial lending division. And I would say for me personally, I've always had an affinity for entrepreneurship. I wanted to own my own business, but I just didn't know what lane it was going to be in. And so when the opportunity came to me to consider, hey, why don't you get into commercial real estate? At first I said, no, thanks. I have no desire to go from a nice comfy salary with full benefits. I worked for a wonderful organization with a great team and a great culture. But what was interesting to me in doing that was because I could become my own boss in a way. I was an independent contractor. Now I did work for a big corporate commercial real estate firm that's global, which was interesting too. But I actually wrote the business plan for my company now 12 years ago when I was getting into the business, thinking at some point I would launch. And so 3 years ago I did. So it's been a crazy wild journey. And I think a lot of it is that I probably wouldn't have considered it if not I was asked to come into it. But it took me 6 months to even consider making the change. Because it's scary sometimes when your income changes. But I think anyone that's a business owner that's entrepreneurial minded, I think we have a little bit of a different risk tolerance to us and have kind of the get up and go that is required of business owners. And that's been a wild ride and journey. So it's been wonderful to get to work in the industry and get to work with business owners and that side of the coin, understanding the banking background, but now getting to work with them in wealth generation through real estate.
What an amazing background, especially with commercial real estate. I mean, to
Yeah,
like have the banking. I mean, you cannot buy commercial real estate unless you've got cash out there, which some of you
right.
guys might be, right? If you're buying a smaller property, but
Sure.
it's hard to get commercial real estate without actually going to a bank, right? And so you have an amazing background from that standpoint because you can talk about the financing side also,
It
which
can.
is really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's
So
very
first of
important.
all, Kirsten, is buying real estate, commercial real estate, is that something that everybody should be thinking about?
Not necessarily. And so a lot of times when I meet with clients, they come to me because they have a need for space for their business. And whether they are a startup entrepreneur and they're looking at space for the first time, maybe it's a single office space for a tech company, or maybe they're a restaurant entrepreneur, whatever. And then additionally, they haven't always thought through what that means to them. And so if you think about from a revenue and expense standpoint, the space you have to pay to operate your business in is probably the second most highest expense in your world. I mean, after payroll, quite honestly, because you probably can't, run your company with just you, maybe, but you're probably going to add a teammate. And then the next thing is space, and really think carefully about that. There are a number of my clients, depending on how they're structured, it doesn't benefit them financially to own real estate. And some of them it does. And I am not a CPA. That's your business, Suzanne, to try to figure out how that structure makes sense. But one thing that I encourage, and I myself own real estate as a company owner, and there's so many amazing, tax benefits and wealth generators that can be within that. But the one question I always want to ask all of my clients, I'm going to ask all of you too, is what is your exit strategy? So if you're considering getting into real estate to occupy space for your business or as an investment, and those are two different kind of lanes to think about, I'm going to ask you, how long are you going to keep that real estate? Are you acquiring it, whether you're leasing it or buying it? Are you acquiring it as a temporary place for the next 1 to 5 years? Or is this a longer term hold? And if you're a company that's growing, I think you need to dial down on this pretty intimately, because quite honestly, what I hate for you to be is either you get way too much space and you have waste and inefficiencies, or you take on too small of a space and you're bursting at the seams and you're frustrated because you're like, we can't take on that new client or that new contractor, that new vendor, because we physically don't have the room. So that is a strategy to really think about in depth from day one. And so how's that to a roundabout answer? Not everyone should invest in real estate, but I think it depends on the person. It depends on the company.
I think that's a great answer too with that, Kirsten, because it's not easy to get out of real estate sometimes, right? It may,
Correct.
depending on the
Yeah,
economy, depending on the location, particularly or even what your options are. It may not be a
absolutely.
30-day venture to get out of this. And
Absolutely.
so you definitely want it to be something that you're going to be happy there for a long time. And you're absolutely right. Nobody wants to be in a place where you don't want to accept the client because you physically don't have employees, because you don't have any
Yeah.
room to put them at to do the work.
Yes.
And so none of us want to have that limitation. So that is a good thing. Now, I'm curious though, when you're buying real estate now and you're ready to buy real estate, what, in terms of like when you're looking at like buying bigger than what you need versus what you need, right? Because bigger than what you need is going to cost you more.
Potentially. Yeah. Yeah, potentially. I mean, so how do you figure all that out? Like, what's the right size?
Exactly, exactly. And not
Yeah.
end up building poor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I face this as my own company, and thinking about like, okay, what do I truly need? And then what's the opportunity? I think first and foremost, I want you to look at your cash reserves, because it might be a situation where you have enough cash reserves, and depending on the market you're in, and you think about, okay, and your needs are, I'm going to give an example. Let's say you have a tech company and you employ 20 people, and you're thinking, we really need a space that can have office space for those 20 people. We need client collaboration space. We need some good audio video technology rooms where we can have, conferencing and things like that. And we need a place where when our clients come to visit us, they get a little bit of the wow factor. And I think that's a very common thing for companies to think about. Okay, so you kind of put all those pieces together and make your list. Then you start thinking about, okay, where am I going to be located? Because even though, I mean, they talk about in real estate, location, 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 yes and no. So location can be had. You do want to have synergy in close proximity to other like kind companies or collaborators. Do you want to be able to, pop across the street or a 5-minute drive away versus an airplane ride away or an hour drive across the city? Think about that. Think also about transportation logistics. Do you want to make it easy if you have a business where you need to get truck fleets in? Can they get to you quickly off of a highway system? And that might dictate, the ease of that. Are you easy to find? So if you have clients traveling from out of town, are you squirreled away in some business park where it's hard to get to? Do you need to have amenities nearby? Are you somebody that needs to take clients out for entertainment, for lunches and dinners and happy hours? Do you need to have those amenities too? Also think about your staff. So staff that's going to occupy the space, how are they being integrated into the surroundings too? Do they have options? Is it easy for them to get to? If you want them to come to the office, is it a place where they feel good about walking in the door because they have everything they need right there and feel good about being in the space versus maybe buying something that's a little less desirable, or maybe it's, less expensive. I mean, so there's lots of things to consider. So I think there's lots of different reasons. So thinking about, you know, what that means for your company, I think for first and foremost, I want you to think about, before you think about how much capital you can put down on a building, I want you to think about what it makes sense to pay yourself in rent. And I use my little air quotes. I love my air quotes. Because once you acquire a building, however you're going to acquire it, and you'll probably work with Susanne to figure out how to structure that acquisition and that ownership entity, tax benefits. I'm not going to talk about that because that is not my area of expertise, but I can tell you my story. I want you to think about what you can afford to pay yourself in rent. So your company is the tenant, you or some other partnership is the owner. So you're going to pay the ownership entity some rent. What financially does that make sense on your balance sheet? What does that make sense to pay? There's your budget. And then you can backdoor into that. What would that mean from a mortgage payment? What would that mean from an expectation, from taxes, insurance, maintenance, all that stuff? Are there other opportunities within the potential building that you're identified to create other tenant income? Is it a multi-tenant building where you could be a landlord potentially and have income? So there's lots of different reasons. Where I see companies take a big left turn is that they're growing fast and they're doing amazing. And I'm like, bravo, keep going. But it's almost like they get out in front of their skis, and they find this building that checks all the boxes, but maybe it's a little above where they would pay themselves in rent, but maybe they have the cash right now to buy it. And so they take it on. But Susanne, I'm so glad you brought up the point of when they're done with that asset, and it might mean that they're growing too fast and they've run out of it, or it might mean the ownership is getting ready to retire. And who's going to buy that from you, or who's going to take over the company? What are their needs going to be long term? So the last thing I want to encourage my clients to say is that, yes, real estate can be a phenomenal way to grow wealth, not only for your company, but for you personally, if you're an owner. But I also want you to think about, okay, how hard will it take to sell that asset down the road when you're ready to sell it? Because at some point you're going to sell it, whether it mean you pass it on to your heirs or you sell it outright, maybe to the incoming ownership or a new partnership or something. At some point, you're going to dispose of that asset. And I want to make it as seamless and easy for you as possible to generate the most amount of proceeds you can at the end. I know we covered a lot here and I was going on around.
It was good stuff, though. It was really good stuff. I mean, it had me just percolating on a lot of different questions. I mean, it's a really great conversation here. Because the reality is there are some buildings that are going to be easier to sell than others, right?
That is absolutely true.
When you walk out and there's restaurants, there's other businesses, there's walking areas, right? It's
Sure.
safe. Certain areas are just going to be much easier to sell versus others.
It could be. It absolutely could.
And so going into that, that's a great thing to consider is your exit strategy. And neighborhoods can change, right? It can be a great neighborhood when you buy in, and 10 years from now, we'll be like, okay, we've not gone in that direction. But what are some things that make a building easier to sell?
Yeah. Part of it's proximity to other like-kind businesses. And I think commercial is a little different than residential in the sense that, yes, neighborhoods can get blighted in areas, but at the same time, that could be also an opportunity. If you're an up-and-coming company and you see an opportunity to acquire a building in an area that maybe had some blight, but maybe is getting some economic development incentives to rejuvenate it. I know you and I talked offline a little earlier about opportunity zones. I mean, there are plenty of other reasons for buying in neighborhoods, especially commercial neighborhoods that haven't seen some regeneration. You could be the catalyst for that, or you could be part of that catalyst to rework a neighborhood. And then your upside is exponential because you could get it on the low end. I always caution people, And then this is a personal question to ask you too. How willing are you to take on a project? Because some people aren't, and that's okay. I know I'm working with a client right now, and they have a decent sized budget. And I think in their mind's eye, they would love to be able to find a building that they have to do minimal remodeling to, maybe some carpet and paint, a little bit of that. And unfortunately, in the market that we're in, our inventory is so low right now. We can't find that, even though they have a nice budget. The inventory doesn't exist. So we are switching gears, and thankfully, my client is open to getting creative with this. We are going after a building that has been vacant for a number of years. It needs a lot of work, and in fact, the amount they're going to pay for the building, they're going to spend just as much to renovate it. But at the end of the day, the strategy is that this is the lone building in this commercial section that is vacant. And everything else around it has been improved. So it's like this one's just waiting for someone to come on it, but it's scary because it needs everything. And so it doesn't have great curb appeal, but I think it can. And so getting I'm asking you personally, are you okay with the challenge and going through a major renovation for future upside? Because I think when this project's all said and done here within the year, they will not have only acquired a property with all-in costs that are far below their actual budget, and they'll have automatic equity. So it's a great play for them. It's not for everybody though. So I think it's comfort level, but I think it's also, connecting, depending on what market you're in, connecting with the economic development players in your community to find out where should I be looking, and connecting with qualified commercial real estate brokers that know, okay, do some analysis, understand not only the demographics, but also where are the emerging areas and where constitute as a good buy. What does it make sense for me and my company to buy and locate? What incentives and things are possible for me, but also as an investor. So you kind of get to wear two hats. As an investor in this area, what does that mean for me?
I love that. And you bring up a really good point. There are a lot of cities, large and small, that offer incentives for
They
businesses to
do.
locate or relocate in their area. And that could be tax incentives, sales tax incentives. I mean, grants even for businesses relocating. So that is a great idea with talking to your local economic development council to find out really what are the opportunities there for you bringing your business, especially if you have a substantial number of employees.
Absolutely. Because believe it or not, if you're a growing company and you are growing your employer base, depending on what state you're in, that could be an economic advantage from a tax incentives. There could be some payroll tax forgiveness or abatements that could be given just on your workforce growth. And again, state by state, every state's a little different, but I would say your state Department of Commerce probably has a really sweet package for business owners, not only because they want to keep them in your state, because they want your income taxes and they want your property taxes and they want all those things, and they want to see wage growth and job growth and income growth and whatever you're manufacturing or producing or selling, they want that to stay within the state boundaries. And so, thinking creatively, and sometimes you might go on, consult the professionals and you say, well, this is what we have to offer. Think outside the box. If you're saying, hey, I'm going to be investing $5 million in capital to either purchase or improve a building or build something from the ground up, that's significant. And that gets the attention of your state legislature and trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean to us and how can we help support that?
I love that. One of the things that shocked me, there was a point that we were looking into buying our building when I owned the accounting firm. Good thing I didn't because, I ended up selling the practice. But it was interesting because it wasn't like a quick and done thing. Like it was actually, a year out, a year and a half out from identifying a commercial real estate broker to finding the real estate to acquiring the SBA loan in order to make that purchase. And it wasn't like signing a lease where you're literally walking in, falling in love with a place and you sign and the decision is 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years. And so Kirsten, in terms of someone that's actually looking to buy real estate, that's weighing that option between renting and buying,
Yeah,
let's talk about where do we start from a timing perspective, from a process perspective. Where do you start with that look?
absolutely. If I could give you any advice, start with your lender, even if you have cash. I am a firm believer in other people's money. And if other people's money might mean partners or investors, but many times it means your bank or credit union or your financial, your lending capacity. And there's also a lot of private lenders that you could go after too. And so depending on the size of the acquisition, depending on your financial standing, depending on your down payment, there's a lot of factors that go in there. Even though published rates today, they're softening a little bit, but I think it's something to weigh. Can your money be more profitable if you are not spending it on real estate, but using other people's money to buy that real estate? And then, that's a question that, your CPA will have to help navigate you through. But I think start there. I hope if you're a business owner, you already have great banking relationships, probably with more than one bank. And these are great places to start. Start having that conversation and saying things like, hey, we're considering purchasing a building to operate our business in. Tell me about some programs that you can offer me. What are you looking at? I bet banks will be chomping at the bit to help you. And they can say, hey, let's get competitive. Let's get creative. What do you have in mind? And it might not be forever. It might be where you can get phenomenal loan terms for putting 50% down or whatever. Most commercial loans, you have to put a minimum of 10% down, upwards of about 25%. So that's something to keep in mind on what you need to put down on a loan. But the more you can put down, the more aggressive you can be in negotiating your, interest rates, your terms, all those kinds of things. So keep that in mind. And then you can take that back and look at your asset sheet and your balance sheet and figure out, okay, where's the best way to park our cash right now? What does that mean? It's not always buying it 100% outright. And so that I would feel like that's a great conversation to have. At the same time, if you're a small business owner that has never gotten the loan, and this is very common. Sometimes, I have a lot of solopreneurs that have started companies, and then as they grew, they hired, and they never had to get a loan out. I always encourage business owners to have lending relationships, whether you're acquiring real estate or you just need a line of credit, because you never know. And I want you to capitalize on your access to cash and credit in a quick environment. So when an opportunity presents itself, you can strike and you don't have to start that conversation from scratch. So first and foremost, I'm sure Susanne, you're coaching them on this all the time. Have your tax returns ready to go, business and personal. Have your financial, balance sheets ready, your profit and loss sheets ready. You have this in a nice little tidy bundle with a bow on top that you can just get them out there regularly, and they know exactly where you stand. Because what I find is that when clients need a lending opportunity, they're not organized enough, and that process takes forever because the banker is waiting on the client and the client is waiting on their bookkeeper or whatever. It's like, have it ready to go. Be so organized that you already know the answer they're going to give you before you even present the paperwork. So be on top of it and be organized.
I love it. I love it. So start with your lender, right?
Start
Find
with
out
your
what
lender.
are my opportunities, first of all, right? Like, am I going to be approved? Doesn't matter if it's a big bank or a small bank, like in
Fairly.
terms of where, like increasing your chances or better support.
Yeah. So I would say typically, if you are a business or a person that's looking to acquire a property under 10 million, Um, you can probably go to more regional, maybe some local banks. I know a lot of local banks, and I know Susanne, I know you and I are kind of in the Midwest area. I would say my sweet spot for a lot of the companies that I work with were under 5 million. And so we don't need to go to the large corporate banks. Once you kind of approach that $5-10 million limit, then you probably need to go to a larger lender. But I'm a firm believer in building relationships with, who do you do business with? Who handles your corporate checking account? Who handles that? Can they manage a loan of that size? Sometimes it might be the facilitation happens with more of a local lending opportunity and a relationship. And then they can actually partner with other banks to put the loan together, which is wonderful because you're engaging those people and they can get really creative with you. But you don't know until you ask. But I would say start local, and ask what they can offer. But it also is a phenomenal idea to keep tabs on what are rates, what are terms, where can I make the most money using those other people's money? Because in commercial lending, unlike residential lending, you're not going to get a 30-year mortgage. You're probably going to get a 5 or a 10-year fixed rate, and depending on what's best for your business and your portfolio. And so thinking about, okay, what are rates doing? What does this look like for me? Do I want to refinance, as I get down the road? Do I want to refinance and pull out equity? Because maybe I'm going to buy a second location. So there's lots of different strategies you can implement with the acquisition of real estate using loans, using positioning and cash flow and equity and all those kinds of levers that you can start pulling. So I know it's a lot to think about, but I would say start with the financial side first.
I love it. I love it. A lot of people, bank with the big banks and, they do the online banking and I love online banking. I mean, there's nothing easier than online
Right.
banking. And they don't build a relationship with the banker. And unfortunately, if you're with one of those big banks where you don't have a personal relationship or even private banking, when you need a loan, it's starting from scratch versus having a smaller bank relationship where you're going in and shaking a hand regularly and they know you, right?
Right.
It's a lot easier in order to build that relationship from the start
Yes.
because you already have something there. You already have something started. And so that's just something to consider for you guys that are listening in.
And especially, you bring up a good point too. If you're creating personal relationships, so how wonderful would it be if you had a financial need? Let's say you acquired a new contract, but they needed $100,000 up front cash today to be able to solidify it, and you didn't have that in your bank account right now because your payroll didn't come out, whatever the case may be. Wouldn't it be amazing to make a quick phone call or send a text to your banker? Hey, I need this in my account today. Can you pull our line of credit, whatever? Boom, it happens instantaneously. And that's the kind of relationship I want all of you to have where you are in such good standing. Your banker says whatever, literally whatever you need, you know, this can happen overnight if it needs to be.
See, some people have it that way.
They
I think
do.
we saw that in
It's a
the
great
PPP
place to
loans
be.
too.
I mean, there's nothing more gratifying when you are in a position where you've built a solid enough company financially and growth mindset wise, where you can literally, I mean, I can text my banker right now or 10 o'clock last night, and they will say, what do you need? What do you need? Because they know me, they know my business, they know my profits, they know where I'm coming from, and it's not even a question. And I don't have to, resubmit all these things. Yes, I make sure of all the loans that I have for the properties that I own. Every year, I submit updated financials. I mean, they request it from me, not for they can pre-qualify me again and up my rate, just so we have a good understanding of where am I at financially right now. We're on the right trajectory, so we can have a conversation to make sure I'm on the right path. Is there any surprises? Is there any capital improvements that I need to make this last year? So one of my investment properties, I did need to make some capital improvements. And we talked about that. Should I use my cash reserves for that? Should I take a loan out on the equity? I mean, those are conversations that we have, and what that means financially, from cash flow, from taxes, and all that kind of stuff.
I love it. I love it. So, Kirsten, I'm curious, what's your thoughts? SBA loan versus commercial loan?
Like conventional commercial loan, both have advantages. So, SBA, let's talk about that for a minute. SBA is a wonderful program that allows you a lower down payment, usually 10 to 15%. So, depending on the size of the asset you're buying, that might be more advantageous for you because you can keep some of your cash. So, there are some restrictions on SBA lending, and that means if you can qualify for that type of loan, you have to owner occupy the asset. You have to owner occupy at least 51% of the total square footage. So let's say you have a 1,000 square foot building. Let's just use some simple math. You have to occupy over 500 square feet of that building for your business. In addition, if you are buying a multi-tenant building, so you're buying an office building that has 5 other tenants, first and foremost, you have to occupy over 51%, but then you cannot use any of the other tenant income as cash flow to pay your mortgage on that. So you have to create a way in your own financial analysis that you can cover the entire debt load for the building. Now, the income you could get off these other tenants, that's gravy. That's wonderful. And that might go to your bottom line, but that cannot qualify you for the loan. So that's a little bit of a surprise sometimes because they might say SBA lending, that's what I want to go, less down payment, I have this cash flow. Well, hold on a minute. You can't always qualify for that. SBA tends to offer, maybe their interest rate might be a little higher, but they usually offer more favorable terms, meaning they can have a fixed rate for a little bit longer period. So I think it's something to consider. There's a lot more hoops to jump through. And if you decide to go that route and you want to consider that, make sure you're connecting with a lender, because SBA doesn't do the entire financing. They have to connect with a conventional bank or lender to partner up the loan, because in essence, it's two kinds of loans, but it's backed by the government, which is pretty cool. So a little more stable loan, but a lot more hoops to jump through and a lot more provisions you have to provide. Let's switch gears for a second for conventional lending. Now, conventional lending, typically banks will offer you, down payments of 20 to 25%, depending on the size of the loan and depending on the bank, quite honestly. I know I've gotten loans before from more local bankers, depending on how they're structured. Some banks will immediately sell their loans to the secondary market. So you think about, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, things like that, or other type of capital markets. I love banks, depending on the size of the loan that I'm going after, that are able to keep the loan on their books, because sometimes they're able to get more creative with your rate and your term, depending on your credit worthiness and depending on what kind of cash you have in the bank for capital. And so it's just thinking outside the box. Now, if you're a buyer that is the multi-million dollar, property buyer, maybe you might not get as creative as that. But I think it's also getting creative on what you can put down in your down payment and leveraging that a little bit differently. I think it's a question to ask for everybody. If you are in a position where you have an opportunity to buy a property and you fit the SBA requirements and that makes sense for you, please explore it. I think it's a wonderful program to have. But if you have the capacity to have more of a down payment or acquire funds differently or leverage it differently, you might consider all your options. I mean, because I think there's pros and cons. I think there's also on the SBA lending platform, there's a lot more reporting standards. And when you exit the property, it's a little different as well. So these are all, it's not a one size fits all and it's not an automatic.
Yeah, definitely the application process can be much longer with the SBA.
Can be.
It's just something to consider with that. And commercial probably is a little bit easier in many cases. So,
In many cases it is. It's a little more straightforward.
yeah. So definitely some things to consider. But that was a really good in-depth analysis on that. That's definitely helpful. Now, Kirsten, when in terms of the next steps, in terms of once you've found your banker and you know what you can afford, you've done your budgeting to see that you can actually pay for this cash, because nobody wants to be real estate poor, right?
Yes.
How do you find a commercial real estate agent? Like, how do you know who's going to be good, or how do you even find that person? Because
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to find a home agent, right? Because they're everywhere. That you get the magazines, you get the postcards in the mail. But how do you find your commercial real estate agent?
Absolutely. I would say use your network. Talk to other people that you know that have purchased commercial property and ask them who they use. If you're connected with your local chamber of commerce, ask who people are. I know commercials, especially in my 12 years in the business, I feel like we're a little bit of a hidden gem. There's not as many commercial brokers out there as residential brokers. Even though the licensing is exactly the same, the expertise area is completely different. And so I want you to have the best advisors on your team as possible. From your CPA to your banker to your insurance agent to your attorney, I want you to have a team of experts. So ask that team of experts who they would recommend as well, who have they worked with, and have a conversation with them. I'm a firm believer, especially when I work with bankers, because I work with a lot of bankers on a regular basis with clients. And so I know pretty in detail what bankers offer really good rates and terms. But what more importantly, I want to really work with somebody that is a great communicator, understands the goals of myself and my business, understands the objectives I'm trying to accomplish, also understands the process, understands the lending process, understands the hoops you have to jump through to make sure these are qualifiable. And so I'll be quite honest with you, depending on the market you're located in, if you're in a smaller market, and my primary market is a smaller market, I work in a primary market of 100,000 people. But thankfully, I'm just west of Kansas City, so I have a larger market to tap into, 30 minutes away. But maybe you're in a more rural community. There might not be commercial agents. So I think it might not be somebody that can help you physically find the property, but I think somebody that can advise you on the attributes and aspects of evaluating the deal is probably pretty important. Commercial properties as well, they're not always publicized in a public forum, which makes it a little challenging. Just so try to go after like, I don't even know what's available. That's where commercial brokers can come in and take a deep dive and find out, okay, what truly is available in your market. But there's also some other economic development professionals that can probably help with that too. I mentioned, whether it's a economic development arm of a chamber of commerce or an initiative by your local city or county, those might be resources you can tap into as well. But I think having the expertise of a brokerage, I think will help you navigate the deal a little better.
I love that. And I believe, Kirsten, you also work with people around the country
I do.
also with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Me
there's
too.
other alternatives too from that standpoint with, Kirsten, she works with people everywhere,
I
which is
do.
great. From a profit first tip, one of the things that we recommend in profit first is once you find out, what you are can be approved for, the next question is, can you afford it? Like physically afford it. Of course, the banker might say you can afford it, but
Right.
only you're going to know. And how you're going to know is you're going to create a special account. You're going to create a vault account called a real estate hold account. And you're going to try paying that mortgage for, I would say, at least 6 months. One, you're building out your down payment, which is great, but you're going to pay that mortgage and see if your cash flow can actually support that before you sign a dotted line.
Yep.
And and it's going to be very eye-opening for many of you. Some of you may end up downgrading a little bit on a dream, or some of you may end up upgrading, but you're going to actually pay into a real estate hold account to see, is that mortgage really affordable?
Right. That is fantastic advice. And I think all of us, when going through the pandemic a few years ago, the best advice I can give to people, especially people that own real estate, if you cannot support your expenses for at least 3 months with no income coming in. So you have your full payroll, your full utilities, inventory, all that kind of stuff. If you can't afford that with no income coming in, you have no business acquiring a building. And that's kind of a hard truth because the last thing I want to happen is have a bank come and say, I'm sorry, we're taking the keys. You're done. And then what happens to your business? So the other thing I want to recommend too, don't overbuy and overbuild it. I see this very commonly with companies that, and in this day and age, we get influenced by the world and the social media outlets. We want these sparkly, amazing, pretty office spaces or storefronts or whatever that are just like, wow, okay. And it's kind of the imposter syndrome dynamic where I see people like maybe they have the capital to get started. And I caution them, I'm like, but you haven't tested this concept yet, whether they're new enough or they're new to the building ownership. I'm like, take some time. Don't overbuild it and don't over remodel it. And that stretches your budget to the point where it doesn't make any sense. I know it's very tempting, especially when you come into an existing space, but maybe it was built 30 years ago and the colors were hunter green and cranberry or whatever it may be. And I want to ask you, I'm like, okay, but maybe the hunter green and cranberry is in fantastic shape and it's being maintained really well, and that golden oak is still in great shape. Think about that. Is that going to impact the way you run your company? Honestly, is an aesthetic? And how far do you want to take renovations? Or can you postpone renovations for a few years until you're like, okay, now's the time. Now maybe we've refinanced our loan and we got a better rate and we're able to pull some equity and we're able to do that $100,000 in renovations and we're not going to skip a beat. That's the position I want you to be in. And I joke sometimes when people ask me, gosh, commercial real estate must be so exciting. You must get to go into these amazing buildings. I said, actually, more often than not, I help people buy the unsexy buildings. I help people buy the dirty warehouse that has good bones, that gets a renovation, or that you put a manufacturing tenant in that cash flows and gives you an 8% cap rate. I'm like, that's the cool side of real estate because I help people build wealth. I'm not here to help you, zhuzh up your space all the time unless it makes sense for you. But more importantly, I want you to be on solid ground so you are building wealth through the real estate purchase and acquisition that enhances your company's efforts.
And I love that you say that too, Kirsten, because a lot of people don't realize this, but when you make money on real estate, you make it on the buy side, meaning that it's a bargain purchase.
Yes.
That's where you're going to make your money. Not
And,
necessarily on the
and then,
sell side, it's the buy side. Because real
correct.
estate only appreciates what, like 3% per year?
Well, it's funny. I mean, that it in different markets, it's different things. Typically, it's between 4 and 5% a year. So it's a slow growing asset. I mean, you're not going to make as much on real estate traditionally on average than you will, getting playing the stock market or investing in other companies. It's a solid, safer, slow growing asset. And then, like you said earlier, it can have some phenomenal tax advantages. And so I'm always proponent as, if you're a high worth individual and you're a high earner, let's get that tax basis down as low as possible. And that's a wonderful way to make that happen. It also allows you, we talk about exit strategy, and if when you're done in your career and you're done owning the company, you could continue to own the asset, to own the property, and be a landlord and continue cash flow coming in. That's a strategy my husband and I have for the assets that we own. And when we get to retirement age, we might not sell the real estate. We might keep it forever and pass it to our heirs, but they have that continuous cash flow coming in. Because the other question I get a lot from clients is when they are ready to sell and they freak out like, oh, capital gains tax, I don't want to roll it into something else using a 1031 exchange. And I say to them, and I'm Suzanne, you probably do too, is that capital gains tax, whatever the year you're in and whatever the government decides what that amount's going to be, it is a necessary evil sometimes. But you have to think about, okay, you just took tax advantages over the life of you owning that asset. You probably got a cash flow off of it after you paid the debt down. So if you think about the amount of money that you just made off of that one asset, capital gains tax should be an easier pill to swallow in a ways. But everyone's a little bit different on how they navigate that.
So true. Very, very true with that too. And I love the part that you mentioned earlier too, is that you gotta have the reserves, the cash reserves, right?
Cash reserves.
That if you don't have a safety net, if you don't have a rainy day fund to cover your businesses, you should not be looking at real estate
No.
because, there's going to be things that pop up when you own real estate. There's going to be air conditioner that goes out. There's going to be furniture, right? Now that you've got this beautiful building, your employees need desks, right? And and so, they need a refrigerator to put things
Yeah.
in, right? To keep their
Technology
lunches
upgrades, all
cool.
those kinds of things, right? You
And
know.
and so it's not just the cost of the building that you have to consider, but the cost of making that building ready also. So very, very important. Now, Kirsten, you have shared with us so many golden values of nuggets and things that we're definitely going to use in our real estate journey. But Kirsten, if you have to leave our guests with a piece of advice, it can be personal or business,
Yeah.
what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah. I love goal setting and I like strategic planning. And I'm always thinking about, what is the next year, 5, 10, 20 look like? And kind of build that out for yourself. I think if you're somebody that hasn't thought that far in advance and you're a business owner, do that now, first and foremost. I also like to do some reflections. If you're struggling to kind of get started with that type of concept, go back in time for a second. Go back 5 years, go back 10 years, and make a list of what your reality looked like then. Because believe it or not, I think if you're in a position where you're like, oh, I'm never going to be able to acquire that property, or I'm never going to be able to do that. I bet you if you go back in time and see the leaps and bounds that you've taken advantage of and you've grown, you're totally capable of that. And make a plan for that and start asking questions. I'm sure if you are listening to this and you're a business owner and you're doing well, you didn't get to this place by yourself. You probably have a lot of not only advisors, mentors, partners in your world, whether they're specifically in your industry or not, that are great advisors and can bounce ideas off of. So I'm also a firm believer in be curious. Start asking questions. How did you do that? Tell me more about that. How did you structure this? Because a lot of times those ideas on how somebody else did it might fall into place and you can pick up that little nugget or pick up this little nugget. You're like, oh, I didn't know I could tap into this. Again, state by state is a little differently. Every state offers different incentives for how you can take advantage of different buying opportunities or tax advantages or grants or you name it. So start doing some homework and get excited about it and ask questions to kind of build up your war chest per se, as far as like, hey, now I have what it takes. And I'm not only, ahead of the game on my ability to buy something, but I can further the profitability of my company because I got all those nuggets together at the beginning.
I love it. I love it. Now, Kirsten, how do our viewers and listeners, how do they find you? How do they learn more? How do they work with you?
Absolutely. So my company is Foundations Commercial, and that's foundationscommercial.com. You can also connect with me on my personal website, which is kirstenflory.com, or all the social medias. I'm always available for a quick phone call or just to give some advice and direction. I think one of the things I love the most is helping businesses just understand where they're at and help them point in the right direction.
Kirsten, this is an amazing conversation. And for you guys that are looking to get some write-offs for next year while building your personal wealth, this is a great way to do it. And Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Suzanne, I appreciate it. Thank you.